Let's get started. Story number 1.
I've been on the road for almost 25 years now, long enough to see the country change mile by mile. Strip malls replacing cornfields, broken neon signs blinking over what used to be diners. But the one thing that hasn't changed, no matter how far I drive, is what the night can do to a man. Back in 2013, I took a long-haul job moving refrigeration units from eastern Pennsylvania out to a facility in eastern Nevada. The route took me through the central Midwest, Ohio, Indiana, Missouri, then dipped into Kansas and cut west. It was a solo run. My company had recently gone to a digital log system, which meant I had more pressure to hit marks and less wiggle room for breaks or reroutes. Somewhere near the Kansas-Colorado border, my GPS suggested a shorter route that would save me 45 minutes. Normally, I don't trust shortcuts through rural counties, especially ones that take me off main interstates. But I was already pushing my allowed hours, and the extra buffer sounded good at the time. The turnoff led me to a county road with no shoulder and no visible name on any signs, just a rusted green panel with all the lettering worn off. The first few miles weren't bad. Grain silos in the distance, fields that stretched to the horizon, a few abandoned barns. Then it started getting strange. I passed an old church sitting alone in the middle of a flat field, its paint long peeled away and its bell tower leaning at an angle. It looked like it hadn't seen a congregation in decades, but the candles in the windows were lit. Not electric lights, candles. I slowed as I passed, staring at the small orange flames flickering behind the dusty glass. There were no vehicles, no people. Just the wind blowing through the open fields and those damn candles glowing like someone or something was waiting inside. I radioed out just for the sake of company, even though I knew no one else was around. Breaker, breaker, anyone running through County 17 near the border? Static. Nothing. I clicked off the mic and drove on. The road narrowed about 10 miles in. The pavement gave way to a kind of cracked concrete like an old airstrip or service path. I thought about turning back, but I'd already committed. Then the fog started. It wasn't thick, not at first. Just a low mist skimming the ground, hugging the earth. I figured it was runoff from the nearby river or maybe just the temperature shift as night fell. But as I continued, the fog began rising in waves, climbing the truck, curling against the windows, sticking to the windshield like it was alive. I flipped on the high beams, but it didn't help. The fog just got brighter, thicker. I slowed to 20, then 15, then 10, creeping forward. I leaned out my window to try and get a sense of the road edge, and that's when I heard it, a low knocking sound, not rhythmic, erratic, faint at first, like something brushing the undercarriage, then louder, thumping, knocking, scraping. I checked my mirrors, nothing. The road behind me was swallowed in mist. I hit the brake, set the parking lights, and climbed out with my flashlight. Now I've had to deal with animals caught in the undercarriage before, raccoons, birds, even a fox once. That's what I thought I was dealing with. But when I got under the trailer, there was nothing there. No blood, no hair, no damage. Just empty space and the faint echo of something wet dripping in the distance. I scanned the ditch line with the flashlight. Nothing moved. But I started getting that feeling you can't explain, like you're being watched, not just by a person, but by something old, patient. I climbed back into the cab and decided I was done with shortcuts. I threw it into reverse and started backing down the road, planning to turn around once I hit a wide enough bend. But then the fog cleared behind me. All at once, like someone had lifted a curtain, it just vanished, revealing the road behind me, and what looked like a figure standing directly in the center. I hit the brakes hard. It was a woman, or something shaped like one. She wore a white dress that clung to her frame like it had been soaked. Her hair hung forward, hiding her face, and her arms were down at her sides. Still, unmoving. I put the truck in neutral and laid on the air horn. She didn't flinch, didn't even twitch. I reached down and grabbed the .38 I kept under the seat. I'd never had to use it before, but that night I wanted it in my hand. She began to move, not walk. Drift? Her feet never left the road. She glided toward me, slow and silent, her head still bowed. I panicked, threw the truck in drive, and stomped the gas. I didn't care if I clipped her. I didn't believe she was real. No human moved like that. No living person, anyway. As I passed the spot where she'd stood, I felt the temperature inside the cab drop 10 degrees. My breath came out in a puff of fog. The windows frosted on the inside. And from the corner of my eye, just for a second, I saw her face against the passenger side glass. It wasn't a face at all. There were no eyes, no mouth, just smooth, pale skin stretched too tightly across her skull, like someone had erased her features. And she was smiling. Not with a mouth, she had no mouth, but with the way her head tilted like she'd gotten what she wanted. I drove like hell, blasting through the fog until it thinned and the road widened. I didn't stop until I hit the first real truck stop I found on the edge of La Junta, Colorado. I stumbled into the lot looking like I'd seen a ghost, because I had. I tried to find the road on my GPS history the next morning. Gone, like it had never existed. My unit logged the time, but the route was wiped. No coordinates, no breadcrumbs. I started asking around, other truckers, older guys, the ones who'd been out there long enough to know the back roads. Most laughed it off. One guy said I probably fell asleep at the wheel, but one old-timer named Ray pulled me aside after I told my story. He said, "Did you see the church?" I blinked. "Yeah, before the fog." He nodded. "Then she saw you too." He went on to explain that the church was known in old county records as St. Winifred's, built in the 1890s, decommissioned in the 40s. Legend said a preacher there went mad and locked the doors during a Sunday service, set the place on fire. 28 dead. Only body never found was his daughter's. She'd run off into the fields. Never came back. People in the area started reporting sightings, glimpses of a woman in white, faceless, appearing in the fog on remote roads near where the church once stood. "You see her," Ray said, "and it means she's marked you. She won't get you that night. Maybe not even the next. But she will follow you. You'll start noticing the fog more, even when it ain't supposed to be there." I didn't want to believe him. But I haven't slept right since. Some nights, even now, I'll pull into a rest stop and wake up hours later to find the truck cold. Frost on the inside of the windows, or worse, my side mirror tilted up like someone's been watching me sleep. A year after that night, I had a breakdown near Topeka. The mechanic told me there was something wedged under the truck's rear axle, an old iron key. Rusted. Bent like it had been in a fire. He asked where I'd been driving. I told him I didn't know, and maybe I don't. All I know is I avoid shortcuts now. I never take unnamed roads, no matter how tempting. And if I see candles in a church window, I turn around, no questions asked. Because she's still out there, drifting through the mist, waiting for someone else to take the wrong turn. And if she sees you, she never really lets you go. Story the end.
Story number 2.
I had been driving trucks since I was 22. I'm pushing 40 now, and I've seen just about everything the road has to offer. Bad accidents, flipped rigs, drivers tweaking out of their minds, run-ins with wildlife in the middle of nowhere. None of that really phases you after a while. The road is full of danger, but it's the kind you can see. Predict, even. But the stuff that really messes with your head, that doesn't show up on maps or weather reports. In 2019, I picked up a late-night long haul out of Amarillo, Texas. It was supposed to be an easy one, straight through to a warehouse in Albuquerque. A little under 300 miles, just over 4.5 hours if traffic stayed light. The load was sealed and standard. Electronics, they told me. I didn't care. I'd hauled everything from bottled water to rotting meat. It was a little after 10 p.m. when I left the depot. I'd grabbed a thermos of gas station coffee and a couple of protein bars. My rig was a 2014 Kenworth T680, solid truck, good shape, no mechanical issues, new tires. I'd checked everything before departure, habit, even when I trusted the shop guys. The first 100 miles were uneventful. I was cruising west on I-40, cab heater blowing steady, music low. I passed the occasional set of headlights, mostly other truckers. One of them flashed his brights at me about 30 miles past Tucumcari. I tapped mine back out of courtesy, then forgot about it. Around midnight, the CB radio crackled. "Westbound, you got your ears on?" It was a male voice. Calm. I picked up the mic. "Copy that. This is Redbird. What's up?" Silence for a second, then, "You just passed mile marker 297? I checked. Sure enough, I had. Affirmative. "You see the girl?" I frowned. "What girl?" Again, a long pause. Then, "Never mind." The signal cut out. I looked in the mirrors instinctively, just my trailer, lit by my rear lights. No other vehicles in sight. I stared ahead and tried to brush it off. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe he was messing with me. 20 minutes later, I saw something on the shoulder, a shape, small, pale, standing still. As I got closer, I realized it was a young woman, thin, barefoot, wearing a white t-shirt and shorts. Her arms were hanging at her sides, and she didn't move. Not even when my high beams hit her full on. No flinch. Nothing. I slowed down, rolled past her at maybe 30. She didn't even glance at me. Her eyes were wide open, blank, just staring into the dark. I debated stopping. It's not every day you see a woman alone in the desert at night. But something about her felt wrong, not just out of place. Wrong, her stillness. Her skin looked too pale, almost gray. I rolled down the window and called out, "Hey, you okay?" No reaction, not even a blink. I sat there idling for a second, then eased off and kept moving. 15 miles later, I checked my side mirror again, and my stomach turned. She was standing on the shoulder again. Same side of the road, same blank stare. There was no way she could have gotten there ahead of me. No other cars had passed me, no exits nearby, nothing but dry scrub and sand. I drove faster. After about 30 more minutes, I approached a rest stop. A small one of those pull-offs with a single vending machine, a few picnic tables, and a busted bathroom with flickering lights. I wasn't planning to stop, but I needed to calm my nerves and check the trailer seals. I pulled in, parked under one of the faded streetlights, and climbed down. The air was cold and dry. A coyote yipped somewhere in the distance. I walked to the back of the trailer and checked the seal, still intact. I shined my flashlight around just to be sure. Nothing looked off. Then, heard footsteps. Light ones, barefoot. I turned fast and swung the light around. Nobody, but the footsteps had sounded close, just a few feet away. I swept the flashlight across the scrub brush and picnic tables. Empty. Still, I felt watched. My skin crawled. I got back in the cab and locked the doors. I was pulling back onto the highway when I saw her again, standing at the far end of the rest stop, just outside the reach of the light. Same position, same stare. I floored it. Back on the interstate, I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination, maybe exhaustion, maybe a trick of the light, but deep down I knew better. She kept showing up every 20 to 30 miles, always on the shoulder, always in the same pose. Once, I saw her in my mirror, walking down the middle of the road behind me, barefoot, slowly shrinking into the distance until she vanished. Then, things got worse. At around 2:45 a.m., I saw her not beside the road, but on the overpass ahead. I remember it vividly. She was standing on the railing, facing the highway, arms outstretched. As I passed underneath, I looked up, and she jumped. I braked hard, heart in my throat, expecting a sickening thud. Nothing hit. I skidded to a stop and jumped out, flashlight in hand. Nothing. No body, no blood, just desert wind. I stayed stopped for almost 10 minutes. My hands were shaking. I checked the truck, the cab, even under the trailer. Nothing. Nobody. I called into dispatch, gave a half-assed excuse about engine vibration. They asked if I needed a mechanic. I said no, I'd keep moving. I shouldn't have. About 20 miles from the drop point, I started hearing noises in the cab. It began with breathing. Not mine. Shallow, labored, coming from the sleeper behind me. I checked. It was empty. Then came the whispering, low, indistinct, like a woman muttering to herself. At first, I thought it was the CB, but when I turned it off, the sound didn't stop, and then came the knocking. Soft taps on the inside of the cab wall, then harder, more urgent. From the inside, I pulled over, turned on every light I had, checked every compartment, glove box, sleeper, even under the seat. Nothing, just my gear and my own reflection in the window. I got back on the road, gripping the wheel tight. 10 minutes later, I felt something breathe on the back of my neck. It was wet, cold, real. I didn't turn around. When I finally reached the warehouse, the sun was just starting to rise. I backed the trailer into the bay, hopped out, and handed off the paperwork to a guy named Rob who didn't even look up. "You look like hell," he said. I didn't answer. After the trailer was unhooked, I parked my rig and climbed into the bunk. I didn't sleep. I just laid there, shaking, waiting for the daylight to burn away the chill that had settled deep into my bones. When I finally drifted off, I had the worst dream of my life. I was in the truck, driving through total darkness. No road, no stars, just black. In the mirror, I saw her face, but it wasn't her anymore. Her skin was cracked and peeling, her eyes were gone, just hollow pits, and her mouth hung open like a scream that never stopped. She climbed into the cab and sat next to me. Just sat there, breathing. I woke up soaked in sweat, my hands curled into fists so tight I left marks in my palms. I took a few days off, went home, tried to shake it, but strange things kept happening. My apartment smelled like dirt, fresh, wet soil. I found muddy footprints in my kitchen one morning. Barefoot, small. I lived alone. Sometimes I'd hear soft knocking on the walls around 3 a.m., always 3 taps, always in the same pattern. I told a buddy of mine, another trucker named Dale, what happened. He didn't laugh. He just got real quiet and said, "You saw her too, didn't you?" He told me he'd been through that same stretch of I-40 a year earlier. Same kind of thing, a woman on the shoulder, a face in the mirror, cold breath, whispers. He said she never follows you forever, just for a while, enough to leave something behind. I asked him what that meant. He said, "You'll see." I moved 2 months later, took a regional route closer to home, fewer nights on the road. I tried to forget, but I still have the dreams. Sometimes I see her face in other things, in puddles, in window reflections, on the backs of road signs at night. I haven't driven west of Amarillo since. I never will again. Some of the other old-timers whisper about that stretch of road. They say it's cursed. That something terrible happened out there in the 80s, a runaway, maybe a murder victim. The stories never match, but every version ends the same way. She's still out there, waiting for the next lonely driver to stop. Story the end.
Story number 3.
It was a crisp, clear evening in early October when I pulled out of the freight terminal in Boise. The sun had set an hour ago, and the night was settling in quickly. I was hauling a standard load, nothing special, just a bunch of crates filled with industrial equipment, headed for a warehouse just outside of Salt Lake City. I'd been trucking for years, and it had become second nature by now. The routine, the long stretches of highway, the monotony of the road, it was all just part of the job. But that night, something felt off from the beginning. Maybe it was the fog that seemed to hang just above the ground, rolling across the highway in thick, ghostly tendrils. Or maybe it was the way the air felt, still and heavy, like the world was holding its breath. I didn't know then, but I'd find out soon enough. I stopped at a small truck stop just outside of Boise to grab a coffee and fuel up before hitting the road. It was a dive, the kind of place that didn't see much traffic except for truckers passing through. The fluorescent lights flickered in the corners, and the air smelled faintly of stale coffee and greasy food. As I stepped inside, the bell above the door rang, and I noticed the place was nearly empty. Just a couple of long-haul drivers sitting at the counter, nursing their coffee, eyes glazed over from the miles. The waitress behind the counter barely looked up when I walked in, and I grabbed a coffee and sat at one of the booths near the window. As I sipped the scalding liquid, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. It was more than just the fog. There was a strange tension in the air, something I couldn't quite place. I shook it off, chalking it up to the long hours on the road, messing with my head. A few minutes later, the waitress came over to refill my cup. She was an older woman, probably in her 60s, with graying hair pulled back into a tight bun. She wore a faded blue uniform, the kind that had seen better days. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured the coffee, and I noticed her eyes. They were wide and unblinking, like she hadn't slept in days. "You heading out on I-80?" she asked, her voice low and strained. I nodded. "Yeah, that's the plan. Salt Lake City." She hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking to the door and back to me. "You might want to take the 84 instead. It's quieter that way, less traffic." I raised an eyebrow, unsure of what she was getting at. "I'm familiar with the 80, I said, trying to sound casual. "I've driven it 100 times. She didn't seem convinced. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "It's not the road you need to worry about. It's what's on it." I felt a chill run down my spine. The words didn't make any sense, but I couldn't help the unease that crept into my gut. I stared at her, but she was already walking away, her back hunched as she returned to the counter. I finished my coffee in silence, paying the cashier and heading back to my rig. The fog had thickened by the time I hit the road again, swallowing up the headlights of my truck as I drove. The road stretched out ahead of me, winding through the dark, empty landscape. There were no other vehicles in sight, no signs of life at all, just the soft hum of the engine and the rhythmic sound of my tires on the asphalt. As I passed through the outskirts of town, I saw a sign for the 84. It would add some time to my trip, but it seemed like a good idea to avoid the interstate, especially if it was going to be quieter. I took the exit and merged onto the smaller highway, still shrouded in mist. The road twisted and turned through hills and valleys, each curve feeling more isolated than the last. About an hour into the drive, the fog started to get worse. It was so thick now that I could barely see more than a few feet in front of me. I turned on my high beams, but they didn't seem to make a difference. The world outside the truck was a gray blur. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a figure standing by the side of the road, barely visible in the fog. I thought it might be a hitchhiker, but as I got closer, I realized something was wrong. The figure was too still, too rigid. It wasn't moving. It was just standing there, facing away from me, in the middle of nowhere. I slowed down as I approached, instinctively wanting to avoid hitting whoever or whatever it was. As I neared, I could make out more details. The person appeared to be wearing a long coat, its edges frayed and dirty. The figure was tall, unnaturally tall, and their posture was stiff, like a mannequin or a scarecrow. There was no movement, no sign of life, just the eerie stillness of the figure against the foggy backdrop. I leaned on the horn, hoping to get a reaction, but there was nothing. No flinch, no movement, just that same unnerving stillness. I pulled over to the side of the road, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. I sat there for a moment, staring at the figure through the fog, wondering if I should get out and see if they needed help. But something told me not to. Something in my gut told me that whatever it was, I needed to keep driving. With a deep breath, I shifted the truck back into gear and slowly started to pull away. As I passed the figure, I glanced at it one last time, and that's when I saw it. Its head had turned. Not just turned, it had twisted completely until its face was facing mine. I gasped and slammed my foot on the accelerator, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back as I sped down the road, the fog swirling around me like a living thing. The figure was gone, but the image of its twisted face stayed with me, burned into my mind. For the next few miles, I kept my eyes glued to the road, trying to shake off the terror that had settled in my stomach. But the feeling didn't go away. It lingered, heavy and oppressive, like something was watching me. I decided to pull over at the next truck stop. I needed to stretch my legs and clear my head. The next exit came up, and I took it, hoping to find some kind of refuge from the strange events that had unfolded. The truck stop was small, but it had a diner and a gas pump. I parked the rig and got out, stretching my legs as I walked toward the diner. The place was dimly lit, with a few trucks parked out front. There was a faint smell of grease in the air, and I could hear the low hum of conversation from inside. I stepped in, and the bell above the door chimed. The diner was empty, except for one man sitting at the counter, his back to me. The waitress, a young woman with short blonde hair, looked up from her phone and gave me a tired smile. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice thick with exhaustion. I ordered a coffee and sat at the counter, trying to shake the feeling of unease that still clung to me. As I sipped the coffee, I couldn't help but glance over at the man sitting by the window. He was staring out into the night, his face pale, his eyes bloodshot. There was something off about him, something I couldn't quite place. He caught me looking and turned slowly, his eyes locking onto mine. His face was gaunt, like he hadn't eaten in days. And then he smiled. But it wasn't a friendly smile. It was wide, far too wide, and his teeth were yellowed and sharp. His lips stretched unnaturally, like something had pulled them back too far. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I didn't know what to do, didn't know what to say. The waitress seemed oblivious to the man's presence, her back turned as she cleaned the counter. "Nice night for a drive," the man said, his voice low and rasping. I didn't respond. I couldn't. He stood up, his movements stiff and unnatural, like he was struggling to move. He took a step toward me, and I could smell him now, a foul, rancid stench that made my stomach churn. "You've seen it too, haven't you?" he whispered. I didn't answer. "You've seen the fog," he continued, his eyes gleaming with something I couldn't identify. "You've seen the figures. They're out there, waiting. They won't leave you alone." I stood up quickly, my chair scraping against the floor. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. He just smiled again, that grotesque, twisted smile, and then turned and walked out of the diner, disappearing into the night. I couldn't take it anymore. I paid the waitress, who didn't seem to notice anything unusual, and left as fast as I could. The fog had thickened even more, swallowing the night whole. I didn't stop again until I reached Salt Lake City, my nerves frayed and my mind a mess of unanswered questions. That night, as I lay in my cab trying to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The fog, the figures, the twisted man in the diner, they all haunted my dreams. And I know now that whatever it was, it's still out there, waiting. Story the end.
Story number 4.
I've been driving trucks for close to 18 years, long enough to get comfortable with the isolation of the open road, the monotonous hum of the engine, and the miles upon miles of highway stretching ahead. I've seen it all, some good, a lot bad, and a handful of things that I still can't explain. Things that stick with you, things you can't shake no matter how many roads you drive down. This story, it's one of those. It was late fall, early November. The air had a chill to it, the kind of chill that makes you roll the windows up tight and flick the heater on as soon as you get into the cab. I was hauling a load of refrigerated goods across the Midwest, headed west toward Denver. It was supposed to be an easy run, a standard route that I'd done 100 times, but that night was different. I didn't know it yet, but that night would change everything for me. I was driving alone, as usual. The late-night drives are the best for me. Quiet, peaceful, almost meditative. The roads are empty, the traffic's sparse, and I can just let the truck guide me. I usually pick up a little radio static, maybe some country tunes, or sometimes the odd news station if I feel like catching up. That night, though, the radio was nothing but static. That's the first thing that should have tipped me off that something was wrong. I passed a few small towns, their neon signs glowing in the dark, then a stretch of long, desolate road that went on for miles without a single gas station or house in sight. By the time I got to the outskirts of a place called Sedgwick, I was starting to feel the fatigue hit me. I had a few more hours to go before I hit the rest stop I was aiming for, but I was getting groggy. I decided to pull off at a small diner just outside the town to grab a cup of coffee and stretch my legs. The place had a faded sign that read, Rusty's Diner, but it looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years. There were no other trucks parked outside. The lot was empty except for a couple of old cars that had seen better days. I figured it would be a good place to rest for a few minutes, even if the diner itself looked like it had seen better decades. When I walked in, the bell over the door jingled, and a thin layer of dust in the air caught the overhead light. The place had that stale, closed-off feeling to it, like it had been abandoned by time itself. The floor was scuffed, the booths cracked and torn in places, and the counter had an old register that looked like it belonged in a museum. Behind the counter, a woman in her late 50s or early 60s was cleaning a cup, her eyes never leaving me as I stepped inside. "Coffee?" she asked in a voice that was raspy but oddly calm. I nodded and took a seat at the counter, trying to ignore the eerie feeling that had settled in the pit of my stomach. The woman didn't say anything else. She simply poured the coffee and slid the mug toward me. I thanked her and took a sip, letting the warmth fill me up. It tasted like burnt rubber. Not great, but it was hot. I tried to make small talk, but she didn't seem interested. Her gaze never wavered from the counter, her hands moving mechanically as she wiped down glasses and dishes. She didn't even blink when I asked her if the diner had been open long, just a soft grunt in response. That should have been the second sign that something was off, but I was tired and didn't think much of it. After a few minutes of awkward silence, I decided it was time to hit the road again. I paid for the coffee, but the woman didn't offer any change. When I reached for my wallet, she just shook her head. "You don't need to pay," she said, her voice cold, distant. "Not for this." I didn't question her. I grabbed my keys, nodded my thanks, and left the diner. The wind had picked up a little, carrying a damp chill with it as I climbed back into the truck. The moment I shut the door, the engine sputtered. I turned the key again. Nothing. I tried a few more times, but it was clear that the truck wasn't starting. I cursed under my breath and popped the hood, figuring it was probably something small, maybe a dead battery or a loose connection. As I opened the hood, I felt the temperature drop several degrees, and the wind seemed to pick up, biting through my jacket. It was like the night itself was getting colder, though I couldn't explain why. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and started inspecting the engine. I wasn't a mechanic, but I knew enough to check for the obvious. Nothing seemed out of place. No loose wires, no leaks, no signs of any kind of mechanical failure. But the truck still wouldn't start. That's when I noticed it. A shadow. It was a flicker just in the corner of my eye, at the edge of the headlights. I snapped my head up, expecting to see some animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, something that wandered too close to the truck, but there was nothing, just the emptiness of the road stretching in both directions. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just my tired mind playing tricks. Maybe the cold was starting to mess with me. I climbed back into the cab and tried the ignition again, but this time the engine didn't even sputter. I was about to radio for roadside assistance when I noticed something odd in the distance. There was a light, a small, flickering light, off to the side of the road, near the tree line. It was too far to make out clearly, but it looked like the glow of a lantern or a small fire. I'm not the type to investigate something strange, especially when I'm stuck alone in the middle of nowhere, but that light, something about it pulled at me. Without thinking, I grabbed my jacket and climbed down from the truck, telling myself I'd just see what it was. The moment my boots hit the dirt, I felt a wave of unease wash over me. The air had gotten thick, almost suffocating. Every step I took felt heavier, as if the ground itself was pushing back against me. The light in the distance flickered again, and I walked toward it, pushing through the cold, damp air. As I got closer, I saw that it wasn't a fire or a lantern. It was a figure, a woman. She was standing in the middle of the road, her back to me. She was dressed in a long white gown that flowed around her feet, and her hair hung loosely around her shoulders. The light I'd seen was coming from her, not from a lantern, but from her own body. It was an eerie, dim glow that pulsed faintly, like she was radiating something. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart racing in my chest. Something about her didn't feel right. It wasn't just the way she glowed, but the way the air around her seemed to warp, like she was pulling the very essence of the night toward her. I took a cautious step forward. "Hey, you all right?" No response. She didn't move, didn't acknowledge me at all. I called out again, a little louder this time. "Ma'am, are you okay?" That's when she turned around. Her face, I can't even explain it. She didn't have eyes. Not eyes like a person. Just smooth, pale skin where her eyes should have been. No nose. Her mouth, it was just a jagged slit, like someone had carved it into her face with a dull knife. The edges of her mouth were twisted into a permanent grin, and the flesh around it looked wrong, stretched too far like it had been pulled from behind her face and tacked onto the front. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She opened her mouth, but instead of speaking, a sound, no, a scream, ripped out of her throat. It wasn't a human scream. It was a sound that felt like it came where deep within the earth itself, from a place where light and air didn't exist. I stumbled backward, my legs giving out beneath me. I fell to the ground, my hands shaking, my heart hammering in my chest. The woman, if you could even call her that, took a slow step forward, her smile widening, the light growing brighter. Then, just as quickly as it had started, it all stopped, the scream cut off, the light dimmed. The woman simply disappeared. I lay there in the dirt, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My head was spinning. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't explain any of it. I don't know how long I stayed there on the ground, but when I finally stood up and turned around to head back, I noticed something. My truck, it had started. The engine was running smoothly. I didn't think. I didn't even care to question it. I climbed into the cab, slammed the door, and drove off without a second glance. I've driven that stretch of road 100 times since then, but I haven't stopped at that diner. I haven't even gone near that part of the highway. And sometimes when I'm driving late at night, I'll see a flicker of light in the distance, just beyond the trees. And when I glance at the mirrors, I'll swear I see something watching me from the side of the road, but I never stop, because I know that once you see her, she never really leaves you. Story the end.
Story number 5.
I had been a truck driver for years, the kind of guy who lived on the road. The lonely nights, the endless stretches of highway, the quiet of the open air, it's what I knew. There were the occasional close calls, of course. A few trucks had flipped, some accidents I witnessed in my rear view, but the horror stories that get passed around the truck stops always felt like exaggerated campfire tales to me. I used to laugh at those who swore they'd seen something supernatural on the road. Then I got a load that changed everything. It was early spring, and I was sitting in a rest area off of Route 70 near the Kansas-Missouri border. I had just dropped a load of equipment off at a warehouse and was waiting for my next assignment. The call came in around 10 p.m., an overnight delivery that needed to be in St. Louis by morning. The logistics team was clear. This was urgent, and they were offering a nice bonus if I could get it there on time. I didn't ask any questions, just grabbed the paperwork and got moving. No big deal, right? The route was straightforward. I'd been down this way 100 times, and I knew exactly what to expect. Empty stretches of road, occasional truck stops, the low hum of the engine as I drifted down the highway. But something felt off that night. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Maybe it was the strange way the clouds hung heavy over the road, or the way the air felt too still. But I had a job to do, and that's all that mattered. About 30 minutes into the drive, the first strange thing happened. I was crossing a particularly empty stretch of I-70 when I noticed a set of headlights in my rearview mirror. A car, a sedan, was coming up fast. I thought nothing of it at first, but as it drew closer, I realized it was riding unusually close to my bumper. I checked the mirror again, and it was still there, almost too close for comfort. I tapped my brakes lightly, hoping it would back off. It didn't. Instead, the car swerved, its headlights flickering as if it was playing some kind of game. I frowned. What kind of idiot was driving like that at this hour? I was doing 70, and they were keeping pace with me as though they had all the time in the world. I couldn't see the driver's face, but there was something unsettling about the way the car seemed to shadow me, staying just inches behind, never overtaking, never braking. I decided to pull over at the next rest area. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe they were headed for the same stop. But as soon as I pulled off the highway and onto the access road, the car's headlights disappeared. No sign of it anywhere. I parked my rig, stepped out, and scanned the empty lot. There was a lone semi-truck parked in the corner, its driver's side door open, but that was it. I shrugged it off. Sometimes you just get weird drivers. But as I got back in the truck and started the engine, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something felt wrong. The silence of the night was too heavy, too oppressive. I looked at my phone. No signal. Typical. I pulled away from the rest stop and headed back onto I-70. As I drove further into the night, I kept glancing at my rearview mirror. No sign of the car anymore. But I had the feeling I wasn't alone. My eyes kept darting to the mirrors, the headlights of passing vehicles, the dark stretches of road. Nothing seemed right. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. It was around 2 a.m. when I hit a stretch of road that seemed to go on forever. The headlights of passing cars were few and far between. The hum of the tires against the asphalt was like a lullaby, but it only made the feeling of unease more palpable. I told myself to focus on the road, keep my speed up, and stay alert. After all, I'd been doing this for years. That's when I saw it. Up ahead, the faint glow of something out of place. It looked like a figure standing off to the side of the road, barely visible against the dark backdrop of trees. I slowed down, squinting. It was a woman, standing perfectly still, facing the road, her arms hanging at her sides. No motion, no movement. She was dressed in a white gown, though the gown looked tattered and dirty. Her hair was dark, tangled, and her face was hidden behind a curtain of it. I almost didn't stop. My instincts told me to keep driving, to get as far away from whatever that was as possible. But then I saw her move, just slightly, enough to catch my attention. Her head turned, and though I couldn't see her eyes, I felt her gaze pierce through me. It wasn't the kind of look a person gives another human being. It was something cold, something dead. I knew I had to stop. Maybe she needed help. Maybe I was imagining things, but I couldn't just drive by her like she was some kind of ghost. I pulled over slowly, shifting into park. The truck groaned under the weight, and I cracked my door open, keeping the engine running. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment and climbed out, every instinct screaming at me to get back in the truck and drive away. I walked toward her, my boots crunching against the gravel. She didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even acknowledge my approach. As I got closer, I saw her face, pale and gaunt, her skin hanging loosely over her bones. There was something wrong with her eyes. Dark circles, like someone who hadn't slept in years. Her pupils were dilated and her lips were cracked and dry. I stopped a few feet from her, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hey," I called out. "Are you okay?" No response. I took a step closer. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, the air suddenly thick with a sense of dread. "Hey, are you all right?" Still nothing. Then, without warning, she started to move, slowly, deliberately, as if she were floating toward me. She didn't walk. She just glided, her bare feet barely making a sound on the gravel. My heart skipped a beat. Something was terribly wrong. I stepped back, instinctively reaching for the truck door. But as I did, she stopped. She didn't speak. She didn't make a sound. She just stood there, staring at me with those black, empty eyes. I turned around and ran back to the truck, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I fired the engine back up and slammed the truck into gear. I floored the accelerator, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, expecting to see her in the reflection. But there was nothing. For the next few hours, I didn't see her again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone on the road. I glanced nervously at the mirrors, waiting for her to appear, waiting for something to jump out at me. By the time I reached St. Louis, I was exhausted, physically and mentally. The city lights greeted me like a lifeline. I pulled into the delivery dock, parked the rig, and climbed out. My legs were stiff and my hands still trembled. The dock supervisor was waiting for me. "Long night?" he asked, glancing at my face. I didn't answer. I just handed him the paperwork and went to get some coffee. As I walked past the office window, I noticed something strange. A woman standing in the parking lot, staring at the trucks. She was wearing a white gown. Her hair was dark, tangled. Her face was hidden. I froze. My heart stopped in my chest. It couldn't be. It couldn't. I turned around quickly, walked back to the truck, and slammed the door behind me. I wasn't sure what was real anymore. I wasn't sure if I'd just lost my mind or if something truly otherworldly had crossed my path that night. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't ever driving this route again. Story. The end.
Story number 6.
I've driven across nearly every mile of this country, through every state and every back road I could find. That's what I do. I'm a trucker. It's all I've ever known. The open road, the long nights, the solitude. It's a job that demands something from you, but it also gives you something in return. Peace. That was until I made the mistake of taking a route I hadn't planned for. It was late fall when I picked up the load, a few pallets of industrial equipment heading out of Des Moines, Iowa, headed for Denver. A simple route, nothing complicated. I'd done it 100 times before, and honestly, it was always a good stretch of road to drive. Open highway, clear skies, not too many trucks. Peaceful, mostly. But the weather was turning, and that's when I made the call that led to what happened. The dispatcher suggested a new route. "Cut through the back roads, save some time," he said. "It'll be smoother than taking the 80 through the mountains." I'd been on the 80 plenty, but if there was one thing I'd learned in this line of work, it was to trust a good shortcut. So I took the detour. My GPS recalculated, sending me down a series of winding country roads that I hadn't heard of before. It seemed fine at first. Just another isolated stretch of nothing but trees and empty fields. But the further I drove, the more I started to feel like something wasn't right. It wasn't the road. It wasn't even the fog that started rolling in. It was the silence. I realized just how quiet it was out there. I hadn't seen another vehicle for hours. The air in the cab felt thicker, like something was pressing in on me from all sides. And when I rolled past a few old barns and empty farms, I started to notice something strange. There were no animals. No cows, no horses, not even stray dogs running around like you'd normally expect to see out here. The fields were completely still. I passed a few houses, but none of them had lights on. No signs of life anywhere. It was like the whole world had gone to sleep. About 3 hours into the detour, I came across an old, dilapidated gas station. The lights were flickering on the sign, barely visible in the fog. The pumps were rusted and covered in layers of dirt and grime. There was a single truck parked at one of the pumps, a beat-up Kenworth. I figured I'd stop, fill up, maybe take a break. The station looked like it hadn't been open in years, but there was something oddly comforting about seeing another truck there. I thought maybe I'd ask the driver if he knew a better route. I parked the rig and climbed out of the cab. The air was cold, colder than I expected. It cut right through my jacket. As I walked toward the building, I noticed that the trucker's rig was empty. No one in the cab. The door was wide open. The engine was off, but there was a faint smell of something metallic, like old blood. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I didn't know why, but I felt like I was being watched. I walked inside the gas station, and the bell above the door jingled. The place smelled musty, like stale air and mildew. The lights inside flickered, casting long shadows across the cracked tile floor. There was no sign of a cashier, no one behind the counter. I called out, but my voice echoed, unanswered. The door to the restroom creaked open, and for a split second I thought I saw someone standing there, a figure in the darkness, but when I blinked, it was gone. I felt a strange chill in the air. Not just the cold from the outside, but something deeper. Something wrong. I walked back to the door, ready to leave, but then I saw something by the window, a piece of paper taped to the glass. It was a hand-drawn map, old and faded, with a strange red X marking a spot on a road just up ahead. It looked like someone had marked the route with great care, but the map was old, too old, the kind of thing you'd see in a movie, but never expect to find in real life. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I didn't want to stay. I wanted to get out of there. But something in me, something dark and curious, wanted to see what was on the other side of that map. I left the gas station, got back in the truck, and decided to follow the marked route. The fog was thicker now, the road barely visible. It twisted and turned in ways I didn't remember from my GPS. I didn't like it. The feeling in my gut kept getting worse the longer I drove. The sense that I was being pulled into something I couldn't control, something that wanted me there. About 20 minutes later, I came to a fork in the road. The left path was blocked by fallen trees and branches, but the right was clear, winding its way into a dark forest. The map from the station indicated the spot was just a few miles up, so I pushed the pedal down and followed the narrow road deeper into the woods. The trees were thick here, too thick. They seemed to close in on me, blocking the light from the moon and making the world feel darker than it should have been. I turned off the headlights, relying on the dim glow of the dashboard and the small flashlight I kept in the glove compartment. My hands gripped the wheel tighter. I couldn't explain it, but I was scared. I felt like I was in the middle of nowhere. The road became worse as I drove, uneven and full of potholes, as if it hadn't been maintained in decades. I thought about turning back, but there was no turning back now. I had to see where this road led. Finally, I reached the spot on the map, just as the paper had indicated. It was a small clearing surrounded by dense trees, and in the center of it was a single shack. A run-down, abandoned thing with broken windows and the kind of place you only see in the worst nightmares. There was a small light glowing dimly from inside, but no sign of life. I pulled the rig to the side of the road and turned off the engine. For a moment, everything was still, the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. I grabbed the flashlight and walked toward the shack. The door was cracked open. It swung slowly with a creaking sound, and I shined the light inside. There was no furniture, no sign of anyone living there, just dust and cobwebs. But something was on the floor, a small pile of bones. Human bones. They were scattered across the dirt floor, arranged in a circle. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I didn't know if I should be sick or terrified. This wasn't right. The bones looked too fresh to be old, but too weathered to be recent. I took a step back, but then the flashlight flickered. And then I heard it. A sound. A low, guttural growl coming from somewhere deeper in the shack. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just the dark woods and the empty shack. My heart pounded in my chest. That was when I heard it. Footsteps, heavy and slow, coming from the forest behind me. I turned again, shining the flashlight toward the trees, but there was nothing. nothing but the shadows. I didn't wait any longer. I ran back to the truck, jumping in and slamming the door shut. My heart was racing, my hands trembling on the wheel. I wasn't going to stay here. I wasn't going to die out here in the middle of nowhere. I threw the truck in gear and peeled out of there, speeding back the way I came. But the forest seemed endless. The road stretched on, winding in ways it shouldn't have. Every turn felt wrong, and every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I could swear I saw movement in the trees, shadows darting just outside the light's reach. I didn't stop again until I hit the main highway, my truck shaking as I drove faster and faster, leaving the cursed woods behind me. But as I drove away, I couldn't help but feel like I'd left something behind, like something had followed me out. Something that would never let me forget. Story the end.
Story number 7.
I've been behind the wheel for almost 15 years now, long enough to know that the road has its own kind of rhythm. Day shifts, night shifts, those long hours on the interstate where you're just driving to get from point A to point B. It's mostly routine. But every once in a while, something happens that's so out of place, so wrong, that it makes you question everything you thought you knew about the world. I'll never forget what happened to me in 2017. It was late October, and I was on a long haul from Chicago to Phoenix. It was a typical night shift, just me and the road, keeping company with the hum of the engine and the constant droning of the radio. The route was mostly desolate, with only a few towns scattered along the way. I had just crossed into New Mexico, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, when it started to rain. The rain wasn't much at first, just a light drizzle that barely made it to the windshield. But then it picked up. It came down hard, turning the road into a slick, dark expanse that seemed to stretch endlessly in front of me. I flicked the wipers on high, but they could barely keep up with the downpour. Around midnight, I reached a place on the map that didn't even have a name, just a tiny dot that looked like it belonged to another era. I hadn't seen any cars in the last half hour, and the GPS kept directing me toward a stretch of road that looked more like a dirt path than an actual highway. But I was already running behind schedule, and I needed to make up time, so I decided to follow the route. Big mistake. The road got narrower, and the rain kept coming down harder. My visibility was shot. I could barely see a few feet ahead of me, and the only thing that kept me going was the orange glow of the headlights cutting through the downpour. The only sound outside of the engine was the relentless beating of the rain on the roof of the truck and the occasional creak of the suspension as I bounced over bumps in the road. I couldn't remember the last time I saw a sign or even a building. I was completely alone, and the isolation was starting to get to me. Then I saw something ahead, a flickering light in the distance. It was faint at first, almost like a trick of the eyes, but then it grew stronger. It was a yellowish-orange glow that seemed to pulse with some kind of strange rhythm. I slowed down, instinctively reaching for the CB radio to call out to anyone who might be around, but all I heard was static. I had no choice but to keep driving, drawn toward the light like a moth to a flame. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't a street lamp or a truck stop. It was an old, run-down motel. The sign was barely legible, the letters half faded, but I could make out the word vacancy in big, bold letters, illuminated by a single flickering bulb. It looked like a relic from the 1950s, the kind of place you'd find in a forgotten part of the country, the kind of place you'd drive past without a second thought. But for some reason, I couldn't pass it. I don't know if it was the storm, the isolation, or just the desperate need to stretch my legs, but something about that place called to me. I pulled into the gravel parking lot, the tires crunching beneath me as I parked in front of the motel office. The rain was still coming down in sheets, and the air smelled damp and musty. I climbed out of the cab and made my way toward the office, the sound of my boots slapping against the wet ground echoing in the night. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, and the light overhead buzzed intermittently. There was a desk at the far end of the room behind a thick pane of glass. A woman sat behind it, hunched over a ledger. Her eyes were hidden by thick glasses, and her hair was pulled back into a tight, messy bun. She didn't look up when I entered, not at first. "Hey there," I said, trying to break the silence. "You got any rooms available?" She didn't respond. Not at first. Ma'am, I tried again, louder this time. Finally, she looked up, her eyes peering over the top of her glasses. She didn't smile or say anything, just stared at me for what felt like an eternity. Room for the night, I repeated, shifting on my feet. Her lips barely moved when she spoke. Got a room, $50. I paid without question, handed her the cash, and she slid the key through the small opening in the glass. It was an old metal key with a fraying red tag. I took it from her, muttered my thanks, and headed for the door. As I stepped outside, the rain seemed to pick up even more, the wind howling through the parking lot. The motel itself seemed deserted. There were no cars in the lot except for mine, and I didn't see anyone else walking around. It was just me and the storm. I made my way to the room she had given me, number 14, located in the back corner of the property. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and the stale air hit me immediately. The room was small, cramped even, with old, dingy carpet and a bed that looked like it hadn't been slept in for years. The light flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the room. I sighed and dropped my bag on the bed, already regretting the decision to stop here. I went to the bathroom to wash up. The faucet sputtered and groaned as I turned it on, and the water came out brown at first, then clear. The mirror above the sink was cracked, the edges stained yellow with age. I looked at myself for a moment, wiped my face with a towel, and then went back to the main room to crash for the night. I turned off the lights, pulled the covers over me, and tried to get some sleep. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard something. A tapping, a scratching. It was faint at first, almost like someone was knocking on the walls from the other side. I thought it was just the wind, the old building settling, but the noise didn't stop. It kept going, slow and deliberate. I sat up in bed, straining to listen. The tapping was coming from the far corner of the room, the corner closest to the bathroom. I got out of bed and moved toward it cautiously. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. I reached the corner and stopped. The air felt colder here, the temperature dropping by what seemed like several degrees. My breath came out in a puff of mist. I looked around but saw nothing out of the ordinary. The noise had stopped. I thought I was imagining things, so I went back to the bed and lay down again. But sleep still wouldn't come. The feeling of being watched never left me. I don't know how much time passed, but at some point I heard a sound again. This time it was louder, clearer. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and measured, coming from the hallway outside my door. I jumped out of bed, heart pounding in my chest. I grabbed the key off the nightstand and rushed to the door, but when I looked through the peephole, there was no one there. The hallway was empty, silent, like no one had ever been there at all. But the footsteps continued, growing louder, coming closer. I backed away from the door, panic rising in my chest. My hand was shaking as I fumbled with the phone on the nightstand. I picked it up, but there was no dial tone, just dead silence. I slammed the receiver down, then grabbed my jacket and bolted out of the room. I ran to the parking lot, not looking back, not caring that I had no plan. I just had to get out of there. The truck was the only thing that felt safe to me, and I jumped into the driver's seat, slamming the door behind me. I tried to start the engine, but it sputtered and died. Again and again, I tried to turn the key, but it was no use. I looked back at the motel from inside the truck, the flickering light from the office illuminating the building in an eerie glow. The woman behind the counter was standing in the window, watching me, her face expressionless, the same cold stare she had given me when I first walked in. I had no idea what was going on, no idea why the truck wouldn't start, why I couldn't leave, why everything felt wrong. But I knew one thing for sure. I had to get away from that place. It wasn't until I started hearing that tapping again, coming from inside the cab, that I realized I wasn't alone. Story the end.
Story number 8.
I've been driving trucks for most of my life. Long hauls, short runs, you name it. The kind of guy who lives in his rig and thinks nothing of driving through the night, day in and day out. It's a lonely job, but it's the only one I know. I used to laugh at the ghost stories and horror tales the old-timers would tell around the truck stops. You saw what? A woman on the road at 3 a.m.? I'd chuckle. It was probably just a trick of the light or some hitchhiker you passed too fast. That was before the incident on Route 66. It was late autumn, and I'd been on the road for nearly 3 days straight, a heavy load of construction equipment heading from Oklahoma City to Phoenix. It wasn't the longest haul, but it felt like it. I'd pulled into a small truck stop on the edge of Route 66, just outside of Kingman, Arizona. The kind of place where the neon sign flickers and the coffee tastes like burnt rubber. I was dead tired, but figured I'd take a short break to stretch my legs and grab a cup of the local brew. The sun had set hours ago, and the road was empty, just the way I liked it. I'd barely pulled into the lot when I noticed the guy parked next to me. Old rig, rusted out, the kind of truck that had been through hell and back, the kind of truck you only see in the rearview mirror of a freight train. The driver was a tall, lanky guy in his 50s with a worn face and a permanent scowl. He didn't make eye contact as I climbed out of my truck, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me. "Cold night, huh?" I said, trying to break the silence. He just nodded, didn't say a word. I didn't push it, grabbed my coffee, and headed inside the greasy diner. The place was dead quiet, just the sound of the coffee machine gurgling in the background. I ordered a sandwich, sat down by the window, and stared out into the night. The road stretched out in front of me, empty, like a river of asphalt leading nowhere. I hadn't been there for more than 15 minutes when I saw something move outside. At first, it was just a shadow in the dim glow of the street lamp. I figured it was a trick of my tired eyes, but then I saw it again. A figure, moving slowly across the parking lot. A woman, dressed in a tattered white dress. Her hair was long and unkempt, hanging in front of her face, but she didn't seem to be walking. She glided across the ground, almost like she was floating. She didn't make a sound, and as she moved past the truck, she didn't even glance in my direction. I did what any sensible trucker would do. I turned my attention back to my sandwich and pretended I hadn't seen anything. But deep down, something in my gut twisted. I couldn't shake the image of her. Something about the way she moved. She shouldn't have been out there at that hour. There was no reason for anyone to be walking in the middle of nowhere at that time of night. I finished my meal in silence and paid the bill. The woman was gone by the time I stepped outside, and I thought maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was just that tired. I climbed into my rig, started the engine, and turned the headlights on. That's when I saw her again. She was standing by the side of the road, just past the truck stop, staring directly at me. Her hair was still hanging in front of her face, but now I could see her eyes, wide, empty, and dark. I slammed my foot on the brake and threw the truck into park. What the hell? My heart started pounding. Was she lost? A hitchhiker? No one should be out there in the middle of nowhere at this time. Not at this hour. I debated for a moment, then pulled over to the side of the road, my hand hovering over the door handle. I got out, slowly, cautiously, keeping my eyes on her as she stood motionless by the side of the road. She hadn't moved an inch. "Hey," I called, trying to sound calm. "Are you all right?" There was no response. I took a few more steps forward, but my stomach churned. The air around me felt thicker, colder. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something wasn't right. There was no reason for this woman to be standing out here, alone, in the dead of night, with no car, no flashlight, no sign of anyone else around. "Hey!" I shouted again, louder this time, but she didn't budge. It was like I wasn't even there. I wanted to get back in my truck and drive away, but something primal kept me rooted to the spot. The longer I stood there, the more the sense of dread seeped into my bones. The wind picked up, rustling the dead leaves along the roadside. The woman's hair fluttered in the breeze, but she remained still. It was like she was waiting for something, or someone. Then, without warning, she tilted her head, slowly, impossibly slowly, until she was staring directly at me. Her eyes were black, no whites, just darkness. I froze. My body refused to move, my muscles locked in place as if I were standing before a wild animal. That's when I heard it, a voice, a whisper, soft and rasping, coming from behind me, a voice that was familiar and yet not. "Don't trust her." I whipped around, my heart thumping in my chest. The old driver from the truck next to mine was standing just a few feet away, his face pale as a sheet. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and terrified. "What?" I gasped, my voice a little too shaky for my liking. "You don't understand," he said, voice trembling. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." I took a step back, confused and unsettled. The woman by the side of the road hadn't moved. Her eyes were still fixed on me. "She's not real," the old driver continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's not human. She's something else, something that feeds off you, your fear, your life." "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice rising in disbelief. "Get in your truck, now. Leave. Don't look back," he said urgently, grabbing my arm. I tried to pull away, but his grip was firm, too firm. "Please, you don't understand. It's already too late." I was about to pull away from his grasp when I heard a sound that froze me to the core. It was the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, dragging across the gravel. I turned back toward the woman. She was walking toward us, slowly but with purpose. The air around her seemed to shimmer, like heat rising off the pavement. Her bare feet scraped against the ground with each step, sending chills down my spine. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I bolted for my truck. I slammed the door shut behind me and cranked the engine. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I threw the truck into gear, my foot pressing hard on the accelerator. I glanced in the rearview mirror as I pulled away, my heart hammering in my chest. She was standing in the middle of the road now, her arms outstretched, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Her mouth was open, but there was no sound, only the stillness of the night. I didn't look back again. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, my hands tight on the wheel. I drove for hours, my mind racing. I didn't stop, didn't look at my phone, didn't even think about taking a break. I couldn't shake the image of her face, the dark eyes, the stillness. Something told me I'd narrowly escaped whatever it was that had been waiting for me out there. I didn't tell anyone what happened that night. The other drivers would have just laughed it off, or worse, thought I was losing my mind. But I know what I saw, I know what I felt, and I'll never drive down Route 66 again. Story the end.